What is the Volunteer Match Network? Imagine a world of volunteers looking for their perfect match.
When a nonprofit posts a volunteer opportunity on Volunteer Match, that opportunity has the potential to reach millions of interested volunteers. To illustrate the reach of our network, let's imagine that this piece of candy represents 10,000 people.
An average of 15 million people visit volunteermatch.org each year. In addition, each volunteer opportunity has the potential to reach 10 million pro bono and skilled volunteers through LinkedIn's Volunteer Marketplace. 2.6 million employee volunteers search for our opportunities from companies like Starbucks, Groupon, and JetBlue. And more than 500,000 employee volunteers from multiple corporate giving platforms have access to volunteer opportunities from our network. Since 1998, Volunteer Match has facilitated over 12 million nonprofit volunteer connections. Now that you know more about the reach of our network, get started by going to volunteermatch.org and posting your volunteer opportunity today.
And we're going to have the opportunity to discuss such topics as how forensic practice is integrated within curriculum and how it has really involved advancing human rights and justice for historically and emerging underrepresented and underserved groups. Findings from the report show how educators teach forensic practice or illustrate how they do, and the knowledge, values, and skills that are often taught in the pursuit of justice with the goal of reducing and or eliminating health and justice disparity. You'll also see how forensic educators engage in innovative teaching methods, learning inside and outside the classroom with real-world examples of the kinds of activities they're using. And then we're going to offer some recommendations on how educators and students can foster curriculum and professional innovation and educational advocacy to move and advance the practice of forensic practice, especially in light of the CSWE 2015 competencies that really talk about this integrated practice model that many forensic social workers or forensic educators who identify themselves as so would argue they've been doing that all along. So report authors, I just want to introduce everyone. My name's Dr. Tina Maschey. I'm Associate Professor at Fordham University. Dr. Jo Rees, she's an Assistant Professor at Long Island University and currently oversees their Forensic Certificate Program. I'm not quite sure if Dr. Rees has access. She had a computer issue. If she's not available to say hello, she will say hello via the chat box. Dr. George Leibowitz, a full professor from Stony Brook University School of Social Welfare in Long Island. Hi, George.
Hi, Tina. Tina, you may want to close out the polling curriculum window if that's possible on your end.
I did on my end. I'm not sure.
I don't know if it's visible to other people, but thought I would mention that. Hi, everybody. Good morning.
Okay, I stopped sharing it. Okay, great. Okay, hopefully it's gone. Arlene Mabano, PhD candidate from Stony Brook University. Okay, hi Arlene, how are you doing?
Hi everyone.
And we've got Meg Bryant, who's an MSW candidate at the university, was not able to join us today. She's in class. Guest participants include Dr. Darla Coffey. Is she on the call?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes? You want to say hi, Darla?
Yeah, I thought I did.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I didn't hear it. Catherine Dixon, were you able to get through on the phone? Okay, she may not have yet. And how about Deanna Hooper from Social Work Helper?
Hello, everybody. Good to see everybody today.
Great.
Even though you can't see me.
Good morning.
Hi.
Hi.
Great. So we're going to start off talking about the findings. Then we're going to open it to our guests here today and then to the rest of the group. And you can chat via the chat box throughout the whole conversation. or especially during that last half hour, you'll be able to make comments. And basically, salon etiquette is, it's a free and open dialogue, but of course, we are going to just underscore that, talk respectfully to one another as you teach in a classroom. Okay, so here's the report finding. Okay, George, like to share the background?
Of course. Thank you, Tina. So one of the things that are certainly salient for us in the field of forensic social work, the subdiscipline of forensic social work, is just actually, in fact, how overarching it is. And there's been some challenges with regard to defining them, and it's defined broadly, hence our interest in doing this study. So that it's a practice specialization which across the board has been described something to do with the intersection of law and the socio-legal political environment. So most of us recognize that as intersection with the criminal and civil systems, anything from ranging from child custody issues, things related to parental rights, child abuse and neglect, juvenile justice, and so on. In the correctional facilities, most of us recognize that as having that intersection. However, despite its integrated practice and policy approach as a subdiscipline, it's been interestingly overlooked, really, and as a subdiscipline that advances particularly human rights and social justice issues, despite its strong connection between forensic social work and social justice. Additionally, the research has been also a bit, there's a paucity of research and several gaps in our understanding about how forensic social work education should in fact be developed and delivered. I'm working on a forensic social work class, developing one as we speak, and drawing from the expertise of our colleagues and Tina and so on. And there's really, it's really interesting considering how much emphasis has been placed on socio-legal processes and social work, the idea of delivering it in social work education. There's a lot that we can learn from each other at this point. So consequently, we went forth and conducted a content analysis as the methodology that you'll hear more about in a second, of forensic social work, and specifically in social work and the law as it intersects with the law syllabi, and then offer some recommendations with regard to improving the social work legal education.
Yes, thank you so much, George. And I think it's important to underscore that right now, with a lot of the curriculum innovation going on within the field of social work, is that it's important to, the fact that forensic practice has not been recognized as professionals struggling how to operationalize human rights practice in action, that we have a body of work that's been done by forensic practitioners that have had to integrate research, practice, education, policy, and community practice all in one. That's what you do. And you'll see how in the syllabi this plays out. Okay. And here, for those of you who haven't looked at it recently, Competency 3 is advancing human rights, social, economic, and environmental justice. And it really is about taking a holistic approach, realizing and standing for and working towards fundamental human rights of freedom, safety, privacy, adequate standards of living, healthcare, and education, and also addressing oppression. And as you look at this competency and talk about what forensic education and practice has done, you can see that those themes go through what has been traditionally forensic practice. Now, how we conducted the study, we're happy to discuss the methods in general for you methodologists out there in detail, but we're only just going to give a brief overview. It's that we conducted a content analysis and we searched for available forensic social work syllabi that was available via the internet for public view. And so we only included those that we could find that included a complete syllabus, objectives, weekly set or session topics, and a list of assignments. If we did not find it, or it was only partially included, a course description with no syllabi, we didn't include it. And so 22 syllabi when we ruled out all the ones that met the criteria, we had 22 syllabi to work with. And once we went through them, we felt we did exhaust many new themes. Nothing new was coming up on that. So we stopped there in this preliminary analysis. So for the overview of the major findings, Arlene, would you like to?
Sure. So results indicated that between the years 2000 and 2017, the 22 forensic social work syllabi were posted on college or university websites with social work programs or schools. So as mentioned before with the content analysis, it revealed an overarching theme focused on forensic social work and the pursuit of justice. And when that was defined, the syllabi most commonly referred to forensic social work as social work practice at the intersection of the law and legal system, from what George was mentioning before, commonly including a theoretical framework or approach for forensic social work with that advancement in rights and justice. Those were, and then the last one, which is interesting, most syllabi measured student learning outcomes using a variety of written assignment, in-class assessment, and experiential exercises outside of the classroom.
Okay,
Just to name a few.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So here's a list of, the next slide. Overview the characteristics of the course syllabi. So you get a little bit of a demographic profile. George?
So thanks, Tina. So the next two slides illustrates findings in Table 1 regarding characteristics. As Tina mentioned, there were, it essentially provides an overview of forensic social work and the law syllabi. 22 of them dated between 2000 and 2017. About 2/3 were dated between 2011 and 2017, and only 3 or 13% of them were dated between 2000 and 2010. Some 5 of the syllabi didn't specify any specific date. About 3/4 of these, 73% or 16, were listed as an MSW level course. A minority were designated as a BSW level course. Only one course, 4% of them, were designated as an integrated BSW, MSW level course, which is interesting given the our ever-present discussions about whether advanced BSW students can, in fact, participate in MSW level classes. Although all of the syllabi use the term forensic social work, somewhere in the course syllabi, the sample of syllabi actually varied in terms of course title specifically. So about 22 of the 22, about 36% or 8 of them use the word forensic social work in the title, and some use social work and the law somewhere else in the title. About half of them use some other kind of title as well.
Yeah, it can be criminal justice or some other
right.
term.
Exactly. Next slide, please. So characteristics of the instructor also varied by gender and degrees and other related credentials, as you can see in Table 1, second slide. Slightly over half of the instructors were women, about 54%, or an N of 12. 1 of the 4 syllabi listed a male instructor, or an N of 5, and some did not specify the instructor at all, which 23% of that sample. As for the instructor's degrees and credentials, 2 of the 3 instructors, 9 of them, had 2 or more degrees or credentials. About 1 in 4 had an LICSW or other clinical-related license like an LICSW, depending on the state, an MSW, or a combined JD MSW. Only 1 syllabi identified an instructor at the doctoral level with both a PhD or a DSW. 6 of the syllabi did not specify instructor or specific degree credentials of the instructor.
Great. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Okay, now as for course descriptions, Arlene had mentioned this overarching theme of the pursuit of justice. And when just roughly comparing it to other syllabi, pursuit of justice was in 100% of it. And keep in mind that the forensic practice has been around a long time, and justice has always been hallmark of what forensic social workers, what is the overarching theme, but also the overarching vision that has driven that profession forward, despite the fact that it has been recognized. There's been dry spots where even being recognized by national organizations, not just educational, but even professional practice organizations, there's still been this tried and true group of social workers who worked in court settings and all child welfare, corrections, that justice was just so paramount. As for sub-themes, interestingly, that only about half the syllabi describe what forensic social work is. They define it or describe it. So, and that's why I think sometimes people get confused about what forensic practice is and what it represents. It's not often conceptualized, and most people associate it with CSI. Okay, half of the syllabi also talk about theories and frameworks, but not all. Many of them pick targeted issues, topics, or focus areas, and the one most commonly was children and families, followed by the criminal justice system or health and mental health. And there could have been other legal issues, but those that were most elevated are the first three listed here, commonly referred to, as a sub-area of forensic social work it focused on. Targeted populations, interestingly. Now, these syllabi could mix them all within one as opposed to separating them, or they could highlight just children and families. But targeted populations most common were vulnerable populations, children and families, offenders, and victims, if they actually mention a specific population. Probably more commonly mentioned was the settings in which the forensic social work occurred. Same idea, in which you either could focus on one or integrate it all within one course. And so we have children and family services, criminal justice, legal, community, public settings, health, mental health. And if you want to think about that in terms of how we currently teach these courses, sometimes we have in curriculum, which is already overloaded in social work. When we talk about settings, we have separate courses for each of those. Now, forensic social work could come across with a common, address common themes across settings and have in one course, but focus on these different areas. Of all the courses, I think what overemphasized, which stood out to me more than anything, was that they definitely addressed with the knowledge base that really needed to be known about the different settings, particularly how the legal system works, values, considered important to forensic practice because of the diverse ethical dilemmas and may be different than your social work practice as usual, but skills. And as we get to the assignment descriptions, we'll really be able to unpack these important skills that are taught within forensic practice areas that definitely advance human rights and social justice. Okay, so here, I think Arlene, I was going to pass it off to Arlene for the next.
Yes. So as mentioned before, with the course objectives, knowledge attainment was about 50% of the syllabi revealed, where the basic understanding of how the law affects and reflects diversity or lack thereof in society was focused on. Students would also, the know-how, going back to Tina's skill base in the know-how, how the judicial system actually works in forensic social workers in clinical and also judicial settings, and understanding of the relationship between the social work advocacy and the law and legal skills, as well as the legal system, and how that advances policy in promoting social and economic justice. The next slide also focused on 36.4% focused on identification in the way of course objectives, where an example would include identify relevant social work values and ethics and how to apply them towards resolving ethical dilemmas encountered in forensic social work practice. Also, if you look at identify roles played by social workers in the legal system and describe the application of social work values to practice in legal settings. Another example would include develop familiarity with the adversarial nature of the legal process and with the civil and criminal issues and laws that impact the client populations.
Yeah, and if I might interject here for a second, Arlene.
Sure.
What's important here is that currently there's been a divide between research, practice, and policy. And forensic social work, as you see this, they talk about policy in the context of law. And for many practitioners that I've spoken with, and actually working as a forensic social worker for 15 years prior to becoming, getting a PhD in education, that's how you're dealing with a policy in the context of law and the legal system. And you do that in the process of doing your clinical practice as well as research. So it really creates a condition in which it has relevance to real world practice. And so, and getting those skills as an upstream approach and be able to identify core values in ethics as well as laws that are relevant to the populations that you're working with in your internship or your job is very helpful. Okay, next slide.
I just add quickly, and not to steal Arlene's thunder, that alongside that, we learned that many social work students don't realize things like mitigation. It's possible to even participate and become specialized at that level. And when they learn about it, they become intrigued because it does fit what brought them into social work school at quite a high level. So even the exposure of our students to these subdisciplines can make a difference in terms of outcomes in our profession.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, George.
Yeah, that's an important point. So we're on slide 3, which another subcategory is articulation and demonstration. 68.2% syllabi reflect this core subjective theme, which an example may include comprehend and articulate relevant theories and models of offender causation, including the influence of oppression and socioeconomic justice. And I'm sure that given our current, political climate, the current events could also spur students' interest in these areas, as talked about before that Tina mentioned. Another example may include apply the knowledge and skills required to present course testimony, including the role and responsibilities associated with an expert witness.
Yeah, and think about that, how much in terms of other types of courses that could incorporate this idea of knowing policies, knowing your population, and how that can be used to craft court testimony, which most of us have the high probability of participating in or need to be prepared for.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Another point was mentioned, the student will be able to describe the application of social work values to practice in legal settings and present that material in a professional manner. So to be critically analyze ethical issues and legal issues related to social work and the law, and distinguish among appropriate treatment interventions for mentally ill inmates, substance abuse inmates, juvenile offenders, victims, and perpetrators of family abuse and violence, and those re-entering the community after incarceration. Yeah. So there is a various amount of clientele where social workers could intervene in these areas.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Next slide. Continue. We're continuing on.
Okay, so the articulation and demonstration. Again, to apply psychosocial assessment process to evaluate 1, degree of criminal responsibility, 2, relevant mental and or substance disorders, and 3, collateral information, including records, testing, and medical reports.
Yeah, and I just want to, as we're going through just the articulation and demonstration, there's so many great objectives for the courses, but right now, research, practice, advocacy, and policy are all integrated within these objectives, including when you're prepping your expert testimony, you need to do research into case records, the evaluation piece, and all that, conducting forensic interviews, they're both research, practice-based assessments, and this holistic approach that really it speaks to the new wave of CSWE competencies that integrate it all into real-world, real-time practice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and next, articulate. There's a lot on articulation and demonstration. That was the most heaviest objective we found.
So also to include engage students in learning and practicing the roles and skills that social workers use in tandem with lawyers, lawmakers, and those who manage and implement institutions of the law to influence the policy. There goes the intersectionality between law and policy as well. The course also promotes students' development of techniques such as mediation, legal reasoning, research, and advocacy to advance and enrich social work values and goals.
Yeah, so it also underscores from the CSWE competencies the whole interdisciplinary collaboration. Mm-hmm. What's missing, at least in what I've read, is explicit mention to the justice system. It doesn't, there's civil and criminal legal systems, but unless we pull that out and we elevate that to being part of it, it gets overlooked. We need to move from beyond blind lady justice, take the blindfolds off and saying, this is social work practice. And if you take a look at the last objective, legal research and analysis, and for those of you, and I've done research about research-related anxiety among social work students, you put them in, they're anxious about it, but put them in real-world practice where they're actually doing it for the purposes of doing something in real-time practice with it, then they do it. That makes sense to them. Mm-hmm. So that's a randomized control design that they're never going to do. It's what they need to do for their job. So, yeah, thank you so much. I think that's it. Mm-hmm. So when you got into unpacking the course topics, most of the syllabi were weekly. There might have been 1 8-week and 1 intensive involved in the courses. Most of them had some kind of introduction to social work. Not that many defined concepts. Most of them definitely address the legal system. And the difference between civil and criminal law, I think, is a helpful and important distinction for those syllabi that did include that. Assessment and intervention were big. Now, when we talk about assessment in general, which is really, really important, where forensic social work can stand out, is the idea of the risk assessment. We're doing risk assessments all the time, but in terms of learning how to do that, we have students unprepared. They might know how to consume research. They eat up those research studies. But in terms of how to do real-world risk assessment, not too much taught in other areas. And they also learn different kinds of therapeutic interventions such as trauma-informed care. So I know we have trauma competencies, of which the overarching theme above that is that it is a forensic practice modality. Case management care transition. So if we're talking about how to operationalize critical consciousness into practice, when people understand the whole picture, this gets at it because it looks at systems, between the case management care transitions, the individual level, as well as the social structural level and evidence-based policy advocacy. Evidence is a big...
Tina, can I interrupt for a quick comment?
Yes.
So just, I think it's important to say this, is that, from my years in sex offender treatment and assessment world, that this is feels to social work like a very risk-averse society. This is certainly true of child welfare. When we think about restorative justice and other approaches that are certainly on our palette these days for discussion regarding social work congruent interventions, that it is certainly the case that it is evolving, moving target to know how to do assessment, keep up with the latest, greatest research on tools and evidence-based practice in that area, and the policy implications and the legal implications are so vast that it's really a frightening aspect. It's a frightening subfield for people to get involved with. Very few courses across social work curriculums. There's a few around the country that really spent time on that area of assessment and understanding it fully. I would also add that organizations like the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers, which focus on sex offender stuff as an example, 1/3 of those are social workers who just show up and learn on the job, like the back into the frying pan idea, right from school. So this is true of healthcare and other subfields. So it's really great for us to say these are hot topic areas that social work content should be delivered in curriculum under the larger heading of forensic social work.
Yeah. And so this is included in most syllabi. Psychosocial and legal issues are addressed with, now it's not just psychosocial and legal issues. So there we have the psychosocial policy pieces. Anything from discrimination, family level, mental health, human rights are in there, mass incarceration. These are just some of the issues. And self-care, including knowing about malpractice and liability, also was addressed. So what happened to my slide? Activities and skills, 90%, very heavy on the skills base. Again, CSWE 2015 competencies are all about demonstrating it. They want to see. We'll got expert witness, mediation, and alternative conflict resolution. Now think about it. In our current climate and the conflict that's going on between this side and that side, or multiple diverse groups, whether it be about race, immigration, that are modes of contention in society right now, understanding mediation, conflict resolution, working with the divorce couple, all the way up to community level issues that are going on, national and international. What skills social workers, if they get educated to have those skills, imagine. Most courses, again, deal with settings, 81%. Ethical dilemmas, interestingly, I thought it was rather low, 63%. Although we included, if they included any mention of ethics or boundaries, it really wasn't unpacked as much as it could be, given the fact that forensic ethics, all the dilemmas that come up with mandated populations, I thought that could be heavier. The roles that social workers play in courts, cultural competence, very underrepresented in courts, explicitly mentioned within the syllabi, and interprofessional collaboration, 50%. So it's clearly been noted by forensic educators, you need to work with the system. And they're doing it, they're not calling it micro, macro, or they may, but it's not necessarily perceived as you do one and you don't do the other. They're doing clinical, they're doing case management, and they're doing policy advocacy. And I think the most interesting thing, I'm going to pass this over to Eileen, is the content analysis of the different assignments that were given. When we were analyzing the data, I found it very exciting. And Arlene, you could just give us some highlights there. Everyone can see. If everyone just takes a quick look at what's on.
Yeah, so written assignments definitely caught research papers, but the court report, I thought students might be very engaging. Students are to create a court report that provides the court with a brief history of the case, the social work observations, the role of stakeholders at the specific point in time in the life of a case. Also, where it says another example would be students will research the causes, consequences, assessments, and treatments for a forensic population of interest. So here the students is able to select their own interests in terms of the population and deliver a PowerPoint presentation to class about a particular topic. So it's not only research papers, it could be a PowerPoint presentation, court reports, chapter reviews, op-ed articles, and article reflections, to name a few.
Great. Yeah, again, they're capturing a lot of skills in these assignments across the diverse areas that we're expecting social workers to integrate. Okay. So in-class assignments.
In-class assignments. So there's also that connection with oral, of course, oral presentation, which could be done in either individual or group work, debates, current events discussion, role plays, very traditional in a lot of social work settings, role plays, small and large group discussions, in class brief written assignments, as well as Blackboard discussions through online coursework. An example would include case law presentation, where students will be expected to identify a social work case that has been decided and provide the class with a brief explanation of the issue that came before the court and the court's decision about the case and the implications of the decision in terms of social work practice. So here you have the before, what the case, the decision, and then also the implications, where students are called upon to kind of recognize and identify that whole process.
Right. Right. And that's really great. And if you think about it, depending on where you are in the as a social worker, when often think of policy, and social workers could work on establishing, developing, modifying policies at the larger level, but these kind of assignments are for those students that are impacted individually. They're expected to go before a court. There's a law in place, and they have to speak to that and how it's impacted their client. So it's getting both ends of what policy decision making is. And I think what also is interesting is that in class they're doing this, where they're preparing the court testimony and they're having students role play before a mock court, all taking on different roles. Not sure if students like this. I'm not quite sure if the educators would, but some people do in-class pop quizzes. But I can see why they would in terms of knowledge. Mm-hmm. Okay, then experiential activities outside of class.
This is more of a hands-on kind of approach, where the personal observation of a forensic setting is also being assessed. Online learning modules, court observations, again, where I think this is interesting, where it's also combined with a facility tour. Many students are not familiar with the setting, so you will complete 2 court observations and or facility tour. You'll write a 5-page paper, reflection paper as an example. Also, I thought interesting, the blog about a human rights or forensic issue of interest. Students like to blog about different things, so they could use that avenue to also express the theme. A case file, you'll be given a case file and you'll create a case file based on the facts on the case. The case file will be similar to a file that you would use in everyday practice. So these are some examples.
Yeah, and these actually tap even a court observation that taps research skills, where you do detailed observations of what it's like to be in a court setting. Resource guides connects to systems and learning what kinds of resources that you need, and also getting to learn your local community that is where you need to know the resources for the population that you're working with or interested in. Case file, working on the individual, but also how it then intersects with what happens if there is some kind of civil or legal issue. And then blogging about the human rights and forensic practice issue. Most social workers that I talk to across the country that do forensic social work, and students, they're very moved by these human rights and social justice issues, immigration, whatever is going on. human trafficking. And especially after working with individuals, they feel that they need to write about it. A very empowerment-based strategy, and teaches them the skill at the university level, which might be a very interesting strategy for them to continue. And George would like to share implications.
Yes, so based on all of the combined efforts here in this discussion today, so we certainly see forensic social work and what the attempts, the really important and good attempts that are being made across the country to integrate some of this content relative to forensic social work broadly, which includes all of these dimensions: psychosocial, legal, assessment at the individual, family, community, and structural levels, and so on. It provides an innovative avenue for us to move towards this level of integration that, as you can see in subsequent bullet points here, aligns with CSWE competencies very nicely.
Okay. Thank you. Maya.
There's some feedback.
Okay. Maybe it's better now? Okay.
Yes.
Strange. Okay. We have recommendations, but I think that we'd like to really hear from our other panelists. We have Darla out there. Let me just check to see if everybody's connected. I'm going to go to our list of names. Darla, are you there?
Yeah.
There's Darla. We can see her. Hi, Darla.
Okay, great.
Hi.
Yeah, I can't see everybody with my slides. And do we have Catherine Dixon? I know she called in. Catherine, are you there? Okay, Deanna?
Deanna's been writing and chatting with us. She may have lost video.
Oh, okay. Darla, do you have any comments before we get into recommendations? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, first, I just want to thank all of you for asking me to participate in this. You know, I'm not sure where I'm going to land on this. I mean, this has been really interesting. In my head, I'm making all sorts of connections. I've also just heard people use terms like subdiscipline, subspecialty, subfield, and I'm kind of trying to figure out exactly what that means. You know, I actually am in a position where I hear fairly frequently about what content should be in every social work program, and if it was just in EPOS, then we could solve this problem. But we don't all agree on what that content would be, and if we included all of these things, we would keep our MSW students in programs for
Right.
5 years or so, and that's just not so. So I'm very interested in ways to, you know, introduce more students to this content, but also create pathways to the kind of specialization that you're talking about. And also recognizing that sometimes students don't know that they want to specialize in something until they start practicing, and then, you know, sort of come at it from that end. It could be part of a sort of overall career trajectory or professional development approach. Very interested in ways that forensic could speak to the conversation that's been happening within social work education for the last few years about this quote unquote micro macro divide.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot that that forensic, for you folks, could really contribute to that conversation. So I'm not landing on anything, but those are just some thoughts at the top of my head.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, and I do want to comment that there's also research, because there's that whole divide between practice and policy piece. And just by the mere activities that we talk about doing, when you have someone that's working with forensic practice, or trying to think about what does human rights in practice look like, this is it. Or this could be defined as it. Because you don't think of it as research. I've spoken with forensic social workers. These are just the things you need to do. You don't label it. It's just like, if I need to represent my client in court, I need to go to that case file. I need to take notes. I need to do a PTSD assessment because that's part of the court report. You just, so, and my thought is, right now, forensic social work hasn't been included in discussions when it comes to, it's been divided between those people that have been always doing it that way, coming up with competencies to do it differently.
Tina, your mic is not very clear.
Yeah, and thank you. I'm having a hard time understanding all of it.
So Darla, if I can, I don't know if I can, I'm coming across clearly. We're having some technical issues. Hi.
Hi.
A couple of quick things, of course. I appreciated you highlighting, I found the word subdiscipline come out of my mouth as well, and then I had to sort of, even in my mind, I backtracked a little bit. So that's worth a discussion in and of itself in terms of the way we're thinking about curriculum development. I can tell you at Stony Brook at the moment, we're thinking about the social determinants of health broadly, and that usually means integration of subdisciplines, interprofessional practice, and ultimately, I would say, and I heard you say this, so I lit up when you sort of said this about the micro-macro divide. The bottom line is students, as you say, learn what they want to do when they're in it, in the placements in particular, and they sort of get excited by it. We see that happen with our students and other places I've been. I can certainly say that we've worked to eliminate the fact that there's this micro-macro separate track kind of phenomenon that we all were exposed to at one point, and really say students want to develop robust theoretical models to practice at the intersection of all of these things, which students ultimately wind up doing and saying, help me help. Good example of this just quickly is student asked me, I was asked by my field placement supervisor to provide expert testimony on a case next week. I don't even know what the word means. So it's interesting to sort of hear you, and I would look forward very much to conversations about this on a broader policy level and what CSWE can sort of think about as we do curriculum. We're doing this right now in curriculum, so we're thinking, love your insight and expertise on this.
Right.
I don't know about everybody. I was having horrible audio. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Catherine Dixon of NASW National, as well as New Jersey National, and she has done a lot with advancing forensic social work within NASW National as well as local.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be with you. I think I wear a little bit of a unique hat in that besides my current role working with NASW, both in New Jersey and nationally, I was one of those students 30 years ago that gave my field placement advisors a difficult time of it because I didn't know I wanted to do this. And in the late 1980s, there was, people said, what? You know, what are you even talking about? So I'm really just excited that we're having conversations about it because my career path took me not only in various types of settings with court-involved people, but led to working inside the judiciary with the judiciary and then having a focused private practice, as well as taking interns at BSW and MSW level who were looking for, where do I find a placement? And I kept saying, well, a forensic placement, forensic social work is somewhat different than forensics in social work. And so I think where we're kind of missing the connect for students is some people may want to dive head first into, I know I want to work either in one of these settings or with one of these populations where legal things in their life is front and center. But then there are others who will go to school and find a career path similarly with a particular population or in a particular setting, and then find out that their client is court involved. I think it doesn't really, it's kind of a chicken egg. I don't know if it matters which way we go with this. The students need to be informed and I think prepared for a lot of what they're facing.
Catherine, do you mind sharing about, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Sharing about what NASW National is doing. Not all the details, but moving forward, just the practice standards.
From the overall perspective of this, wearing the hat as the chairwoman for our National Social Work in the Courts Practice section, we talked a lot about the fact that when members would call for consultation at various levels, what we were hearing was that they didn't feel prepared with how to handle these things when they were brought into the litigation. Knowledge of your client's background or current involvement with court is also different than being brought into it. And I think that was where we wanted to offer, and we have been given the go-ahead to put down some guides and some tips, if you will, called practice recommendations for those doing forensic social work. And kind of pointing out that while we have much out there already about skills and knowledge, a lot of what I'm hearing today with this macro-micro divide is just what I think is important, a lot of connecting of the dots, how all these things actually, where the rubber meets the road for a student, particularly a novice colleague entering our profession. So we're working hopefully with this year to gain some insight, gain some input, and then hopefully by next year this time be talking about some of our recommendations as well.
Great. We'll definitely have you back. Diana, did you want to chime in right here?
Well, I was just kind of, thinking about all of this and kind of looking at my experience when I went through my MSW program. I took the social work and law class, and I had a macro degree. And even though the social work and law class was helpful, it was more of a civics class about learning how, where a bill is made, the different branches of government. Even though that's, good knowledge to have, I really don't think that it should be a BSW level course instead of an MSW course. I agree, and I can see where the forensic social work course could really, especially with what's going on in society today, teaching social workers about criminal justice, learning all the different aspects of what's going on. I don't think that social workers are really getting that in the MSW program. Looking at the applications of institutional racism, intersectionality, I'm not really seeing where social workers are getting that specific type knowledge in the MSW program.
Some people requested the link to the reports. I'm going to put that in the chat box right now. Everybody, provide a link. Yeah, and it's interesting. It depends on how the social work and the law course is developed to what it covers. What year did you take it to?
It was 2009 when I took it, so it's been a while ago. So it could have evolved since then.
But it sounds like knowledge in and of itself was not. Wasn't that helpful?
Well, I mean, it was useful, but like the discussions that, with the issues that are going on today in society, we didn't have a lot of those different discussions. And at some point, I feel like, running Social Work Helper, and I have a Facebook page, and I've had hundreds and thousands of comments on that page from social workers from all different kinds of backgrounds and specialties. And sometimes it's kind of scary, some of the things that social workers say, because they really don't see the nuances that are affecting children and families, and how, incarceration affect families, the different institutional racism. I mean, I just feel like a lot of social workers that I've had conversations with are picking that up after they get out of school, but not necessarily while they're in there.
Yeah, I think that forensic social work is an overarching set of skills that can be applied to specific populations. I would say people often specific.
Tina, I can't hear you again. I don't know what's going on, but you just keep breaking up.
Okay. All right. I'll try again later. How about we go to the recommendations, and then we'll hear from everybody. If you want to speak, raise your hand, and we'll try to unmute you to talk. So, Arlene and George, do you want to do the recommendations?
Sure.
Okay, sure.
Arlene, you want to take the first one?
Okay. So recommendations to facilitate the development of global justice and forensic competencies in social work into professional education, training, and practice. I think it's important that I read that. Number one is to establish an international task force to develop this educational and professional training standards for global justice and forensic social work practice through new or exciting mechanisms, such as CSWE, National Association of Social Workers, NSW, and the International Federation of Social Work, IFSW. So if we're talking about global justice, it's important to look at the international, right, level. So the creation of these standards should include the representation of all key stakeholders, such as social work educators, students, forensic social work practitioners, and other allied disciplines, as well as those client populations most likely to be affected by the civil and criminal legal system.
Yeah.
So, Tina, could we expand it to the play from slide view? Yeah. Yes. Thanks.
Thanks, Arlene. So we also certainly, we have to think about evaluating our current social work ethical codes and the way in which they square or aligned with our sort of mission here around global justice and forensic practice. So certainly a number of exemplars come to mind when we think about the importance of how we're trying to think about issues like immigration, but community violence, any number of issues. Do our current ethical codes and the way they're taught in social work programs sort of capture just the nuance of how difficult the next generation of social work students are going to have it to see about how well they fit, what they're being taught about ethics and ethical behavior. It's an evolving, changing landscape, and I think that it's important for us to evaluate those codes and see how well they fit. We do a good job sort of talking about issues related to licensing and sort of practical issues around confidentiality and so on. But I also think students need a broader ethical dilemma palette to understand how to unpack some of the complex issues in our society.
Okay, you can just wait for the recommendation to have a discussion.
Yes, of course, of course.
And can you hear me now?
We could hear you.
Okay, great. Basically, this recommendation is collaborate with other professions to see where our forensic codes really intersect and how we can begin to work together, because that's part of the breakdown, is connecting the professions together. And creating opportunities for global justice and forensic scholarship in the diverse areas that might be impacted. Utilizing different networks to develop practice networks through NASW local chapters. I think it might be beyond the purview of, well, not necessarily. CSWE does engage stakeholders, but really building that piece up so there's a feedback loop. Identifying social work educators and creating a network to develop a network of social work educators to really advance this practice. Creating informal and formal support networks, a mentoring system for local junior faculty to learn from each other, especially from senior colleagues. Having clinic settings that are social work led, like they do in law schools, to really unpack this social work and justice intersection. And then the last three, to my colleague.
Oh, feel free, Arlene.
Okay.
I defer to you, my colleague.
Okay, to incorporate in curriculum and training programs core forensic social work skills and the policy component, policy analysis and advocacy, such as evidence-based report writing, restorative justice approaches, forensic and motivational interviewing skills, expert testimonies, mitigation, human rights and justice, and advocacy skills. George?
So if I may, so that's,
skills, yeah.
so go ahead, Tina, I'm sorry.
Those are just some of the skills.
Yeah.
Right.
Problem
So it's,
skills, so on and so forth.
so, certainly just quickly, things like motivational interviewing broadly generalize across practice areas, everything from substance abuse to health and so on. So some of these are broader, but they're very helpful across forensic settings, if you will. The next is we thought to think about the field, this idea where the rubber hits the road in field placements to get to be able to integrate all of these things. We're thinking a lot about integration across curriculum and helping students broadly be able to apply them within their field placements. So working very closely with field liaisons, supervisors, and we certainly heard earlier of the importance of in-field, where students can actually start to apply things.
Most of the students that I've talked with that actually later have come teach forensic social work talk about that they didn't learn anything in school. They had to learn it in the field placement.
In the field placement, right.
And the final point is to conduct research and evaluation studies. We were one of the first studies that actually looked at forensic social work education. Some of them looked at professional and training or developing professional training, but there's really a dearth of information. So that really concludes the recommendations. We would love feedback, free chat, or to feel free to email me or Social Work Salon. If you have other recommendations, we can always update these recommendations. But Darla, and if anybody wants to raise their hand, there's a way to raise your hand looking on your bar. It says raise your hand. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Darla, would you like to start with a comment?
Sure. Here you go. I'm not ready to land anywhere. This is something that is generating a lot of different thoughts, for sure. One thought that I've had is that I think that there might be some challenge in just unpacking what is meant by forensic social work. I don't actually think it's something that there's common knowledge about, even within the social work education community. When you start talking about, reintegrating, research, policy, and practice, that's something that people understand. People understand, and maybe it's because of the macro matters people, but we've certainly had lots and lots of conversations about, is there a micro macro? Is it something that we have fallen into, or is it by design? I think that there's a tremendous, as George mentioned earlier, there's just lots and lots of programs that are having the same kind of conversation that your program is having around curricular design, sort of moving away from methods, but really more of integrated practice models. And I think there's a lot of hope. In some ways, it's kind of getting back to our roots, like we were
right. Necessary to do.
Right.
Yes.
It also seems to me that there might be a way to really provide sort of subject matter expertise in folks that are looking at the areas of specialized practice that you mentioned in your presentation, like children and family. So what are what is the intersection of practice and law when you're talking about children and family, when you're talking about mental health? Certainly there should be, every sequence like that really should have a healthy dose of the research and policy implications for working with those different populations.
Right.
So it feels to me that, so I've said two different things. One, I do feel like there is going to be some challenge in leading with forensic, because it's like a Rorschach where people will, right? They have their own opinions about that or experience about that. And you don't want this to be pigeonholed, because I think that some people will narrowly interpret what is meant by forensic social work. But when you lead with kinds of integrated practice models that really bring relevant research and policy to practice with different areas of practice, then I think you've got.
Yeah, I totally agree with the integrated practice model, and we call the report really global justice. We really see this as a model that is actually, we could call it a human rights and justice approach to integrated practice. Yeah, and Darla and I had a conversation before. I said, I don't really care what we call it. We just need to do it.
Right.
Window of opportunity where we're trying to figure out how to do it. And we've had, we'll have a future show talking with forensic educators and all, as well as people who work in the field. We don't have time today to get into it, but I worked in a prison and research for another 15 years around that issue. And it's just different. And there's so many people doing it, and they're doing the good work, and we need to look at how they've been able to manage this. They've done it. We're all grappling up in the ivory tower, scratching our heads. How do we do it? Well, if you haven't done it in a while, or you haven't ever done it, it might be hard to do. So let's hear from the people. I agree with you with the term forensic practice, and we purposely put global justice. We're trying to translate that vision into practice now.
So can I just say, Darla, that when we were writing the forensic social work book, which I hope you had a chance to take a peek at, many of those co-authors who were maybe sort of in other social workers, but in other fields, whether that's international restorative justice movements or peace studies or things that have practiced. Is somebody whistling? Do you hear that whistle? It's very funny.
Ringtones, love them.
Oh, that's so funny. It's beautiful. We should have that as our background theme to the webinars.
Right.
I would just say that this, just quickly, the definitional issue, what do you mean by forensic social work, was a very common question. And the way people at the end said, oh my God, I get it. You should spread the word everywhere, as opposed to what do you mean by it, right? And so how do they align with things that we're thinking about broadly as integration? So it's a great question to start with.
Well, and I totally agree with what Darla has to say in that moving forward, when we did the second edition forensic social work, we called it that because the second edition. There's already a loyal audience.
Right.
Right.
We grappled as moving forward, and our movement and what we're trying to do is global justice. And we haven't jumped on that, in terms of a profession, but it's a competency. And there's a whole crew that people, whatever you call it, have been doing it. And I think that where forensic, that term falls short, is that it lacks a vision, because it wasn't just a method. There wasn't a vision to it. And so that, and not that there wasn't there, it wasn't articulated in its title. And it doesn't inspire people in the way that promoting human rights and justice, like promoting forensic. What does that mean? People are thinking of forensic scientists taking, bodies out of buildings.
And if I could just say one more thing before, I also think that you could really make an important contribution in helping us as a field really define and expand the definition of what it means to do interprofessional or intersectoral practice.
Yeah.
So the conversation about interprofessional has been almost solely in the health professions, and it's healthcare delivery.
Right.
And I'm going to put a plug in for APM 2018. Yes, at CSWE,
Great.
We plan these things so far in advance. I don't know if you can see. We're actually calling it Expanding Interprofessional Education
Perfect.
to Achieve Social Justice. So
Perfect.
This is really our opportunity to lead in this space. Like interprofessional, I sometimes feel like the physicians think that they've discovered this, and this is part of our DNA for since the very beginning.
Yay!
Right? I just really feel like, the promise of interprofessional is bigger than quality healthcare or access to healthcare. As important as those things are, it's bigger because it's all about justice.
Right.
And that's what we would really like to focus
Right. Yeah, and and I think that's great. And let me plug the new journal that we started here, Global Innovations in Human Rights, Justice, and Well-Being. And it is an professional, interdisciplinary. It also involves the key stakeholders most affected by it. We're looking for people to join the advisory and editorial board, and this will help advance Council on Social Work Education, NASW aims, like their social justice initiatives. And we're really trying to come up with cutting edge research, but also conceptual articles on how to move things forward. Vision, we need to do it. And I totally agree with Darla. We've been doing this all along. And Catherine, did you have anything to say?
I'm just very excited. I love when we because it's starting to come together. And I've been saying actually in the classroom too, with the other hat I wear on this, is we need to start connecting the dots better, because we're all doing our stuff across these different planes, but we're not intersecting enough with what we're doing. And I think this is really an awesome start to it. So I'm really looking forward to see what's going to transpire in the next year or so.
Great. There's a question from Harish Dalvi on the chat. And he asks, could you suggest some books to gain more information on the topic?
Sure. You could actually, let me enlarge. The social work text, that this is one of many that you could look into, but this one just came out, and a lot of the themes we talked about today, social work, psychosocial, and legal issues across diverse populations and settings. You can request a desk copy or a complimentary copy, and this offers a social justice, social and justice systems framework, as well as the human rights and social justice approach. It lays out all the different service systems and also the core competencies and skills of forensic practice. So this bird's eye view approach, and you actually call it integrated forensic practice in the book. The title had to stay from 2009. It just came out. Go to Springer's website, the link's there, and you can post your requests there.
Great.
We also started a summer conference at Fordham, Global Justice and Well-Being. We will be doing one, maybe 2 days virtually, so no matter where you're at, and you can't afford more, you're on CSWE and can't afford more conference, but no more conference budget, you can come visit us virtually and present. But we're really looking for cutting edge, leading edge leaders and doers in presenting at the conference. Yana, did you have something you'd like to add?
Well, I guess the only thing I'd like to add is that I do agree that social workers could definitely lead in this space. And I think the reason why other disciplines may be a little bit ahead of us is because they do more engaging in the public sphere through writing and, writing, editorials and opinion articles and getting their research out through digital publications in addition to, publishing with a journal. So I think, I have a lot of social workers that's like, I really am interested in writing, but I don't think I'm a writer. And I'm like, if you can write a 10-page paper for your MSW class or your BSW class, you're a writer. You can write a 700-word article. And I think, social workers, we have the ability to not only write the article, but also be the expert of that article. Whereas most journalists, they have to reach out and find an expert. We could be that authority just by writing articles and showing the research that we're doing in this space that is often not seen because it's hidden in a journal or a PDF that's not cataloged or, put in search engines by Google. And so I think, you know, if we were to engage more in that space, writing more articles, engaging on topics of events that's happening today, and writing from that social work lens, I really do think social workers would really have that authority more so than other disciplines to speak on those issues.
Yeah, I think that's really an important point. I think it also reminds me that we really need to empower the profession, because many social workers, they are the experts. They can write, but translating it, I think there might be a confidence issue, and maybe there's a time management issue if they're already overworked. They're going to do this writing on top of it. But I think part of it is believing in and believing in their voice.
Yeah, you know, and the way that I typically respond to that is that, you know, as social workers, one of our largest complaints is that we are upset with the PR that magazines or newspapers give us. And the best way for us to be our best brand advocates is to write ourselves.
Right.
And so that's what I tell people. If you want to change the PR, the transparency in how social workers are viewed, we're going to have to engage in that space. We're going to have to advocate and be advocates for others using the digital space and using the tools, you know, the tech tools of today. And until we do that, I think we will fall further and further behind other disciplines.
Absolutely. Yes, because what we have to offer is very unique. Is there anybody that's out there in our participants that would like to share anything? If so, raise your hand and we can perhaps have you talk. You're available by phone or by video. Okay. So I don't see anybody on chat. Nobody raised their hand. You can always send comments afterwards too. Is Darla still on? I don't see everybody.
She is.
Oh, Darla, yes. So what we'd love to do is have a follow-up conversation with you. I can contact you at some point about spend some time reflecting. We could think about maybe after CSWE, what might be some strategies to move forward in terms of whatever it's called. But my thought is, if there's an integrated practice model out there, how can we unpack it? Whatever we call it. Because what my only concern is, we're going to move forward with the human rights and social justice and practice as if we don't know anything, when there is evidence out there of a group of people that have been practicing, if we're going back to our roots, that they never lost their roots.
Yeah, no, I'm happy. I'm happy to have that conversation. I don't. So is this an official group?
Yes, we have a.
You just made it official.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Just wondering. And I also just think that, you know, what I like too about the recommendations is that, you know, you were really thinking broadly. So to Deanna's point, I just want to echo that. You know, we need to have more public intellectuals and thought leaders emerge and risk being out there to promote social work and the value of our perspective on a number of different social issues. You know, right now, most of the folks I think these conversations often get dominated by the academics, and we have, like, you know, the usual pathways for communicating with each other, you know. And to Deanna's point, you know, we need to be thinking about additional ways so that it is, you know, opinion pieces and blogs and, you know, all different kinds of ways to communicate. We in academia can be doing that, but I also think that it's about really engaging the practice community as well. Last year at APM, I brought an initiative called the Op-Ed Project to APM, and it was an invitation only, so to speak. It was people who, among the Deans and Directors group, as well as some folks that have participated in the Program Directors Academy. But the idea of the Op-Ed Project is to increase the increase the voices of women and people of color in particular among the opinion pages in all of our newspapers. No offense, George, but there is, you know, a pretty, there's most of the op-ed pieces are coming from the same demographic, which
yeah. Hey, you didn't know this about me, but I have Cuban Jewish roots.
All right. I don't want to assume anything.
And no offense taken. I get it. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
But one of the things that I was thinking as I sat through, and I participated in the op-ed project, and it was really empowering and exciting. And I have written 0 op-eds since then. Like the rest, you know, we get back to our day jobs and they're so busy and so forth. And so I think, you know, creating some kind of a writing group among social workers to really help support this is really helpful.
Yeah, and
great.
what we're trying to do with this summer event is to, and this is to incorporate things like that. I'm a very big believer in writing. That's the thing that motivates me the most, and in any kind of writing. But I also believe in absolutely disseminating your findings, you know, in terms of the research that I'm doing. And my research is motivated by being a practitioner in the field. It's not about doing research. It's like, you know, people really need to know what's going on here around these issues. So moving that from practice to advocacy in a public forum is something I'm totally on top of doing something more and sharing that. There's more of us that get out there. And even there's op-eds by, I don't recall, but there might have even been something in the Times about social workers talking about grappling with the ethical dilemmas about working with these complex issues, whether it be solitary confinement or working with people with mentally ill that are homeless. So there's a lot out there.
Mm-hmm.
I just put a plug out there on the text, on the chat panel, to send me input for the newsletter. This NASW Social Work and Courts section has a newsletter we put out a couple of times a year, and I'm always open to having inclusions. So
did you put an announcement about the report being out so you can get some feedback from your group?
I would love to. I would love to include in my next outreach that we had this event, that we talked about things, and that the report is there. So I'll give them the links to follow up. It's an important piece of it. And I think, you know, I've had students who are really grateful for that opportunity too. I mean, from the classroom allows them to kind of start to comment on what they see when they begin going out to different field placements, and how some of this material in the classroom starts to make sense to them.
Yeah. You know, thank you so much, Catherine. And Catherine does so many wonderful things. I'm very awe of everything that she's done, from the classroom all the way up to NASW. One thing, Darla, I did want to mention is to everybody, we forget when we have discussions of privilege, we talk about it in terms of characteristics of individuals, and I don't hear much in the dialogue of the privileging of knowledge and the hierarchy of one school is better than the other school, or 5 schools are better than all 95 others put together. That doesn't make sense to me. Because when you really think about it, if it's a small school in some rural location, who knows what state, how does another party know more about them than them themselves? So when we're disseminating knowledge, so this is when it gets down to, I think, the writing, and it doesn't communication about who's doing what, like the experts of their experiences. We are applying that to clients more and more, but we're not necessarily doing that in the profession. Right. Understanding and teaching human rights and social justice, that we have to look at our stuff. And do you think that's something of interest to the profession to really look at? How do we privilege knowledge, and why are there only 5 to 10 people that we're supposed to listen to tell us how to practice?
I think I lost the last little bit of what you said, and that might have been the question you want me to answer.
Yeah. So just your thoughts on it in terms of will that do you think be of interest to people to discuss? Because I think when we're teaching human rights and social justice, we're supposed to look at our stuff, and that includes within our educational system or profession, whatever you want to refer to it. If we're privileging some voices over others.
Well, yeah, okay, so that's easy. Of course, that happens all the time. Recently I heard the phrase elite narratives, and I think that it's something that we need to be really careful about. It's counter to our ethics, it's counter to our values and so forth, but schools do care about the U.S. News World rankings. Or at least their provosts care, which means that their deans and directors better care. So, it's definitely a struggle. I mean, at CSWE, we don't, we've got over 750 accredited programs, and we love all of our children equally. But I do think that, there's, even in the conversation about the grand challenges, I'll use that as an example.
It hasn't come up yet in this conversation, Darla. Feel free.
So the grand challenges, it's an initiative of the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare. We're happy to be a part of it. But one of the things that I've said to those folks whenever I get a chance is that we have to be careful that it doesn't become one of the elite narratives, that it's really just the big research intensive schools.
Yep.
There's in fact fabulous, creative, innovative, important work going in lots and lots of other programs. Some of these are only 2-people programs in rural parts of our country, and have a lot to be said. So it is one of the challenges that I'm happy to take on, which is to really make sure that we give some of those smaller programs an opportunity to participate.
Well, yeah, that's so great to hear. How about CSWE, if we had a movement for the grand opportunity in social work is to engage all key stakeholders in defining what is the opportunities we can move forward.
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. But
I say, how about we have a movement in CSWE about the grand opportunity of social work?
Yeah,
equality
grand has already been claimed, so I don't know. Let's figure out a different phrase.
Right.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any comments before we finish up? Any from our attendees?
It's 1:30.
Okay. I think no. Well, I want to thank everybody so much for participating today. Hearing about what we found within the course syllabi as we move forward towards integration. I'm hoping that some of that information, whatever we call it, I think we can at least glean some gems from today's findings. We want to thank Darla Coffey, Deanna Hooper, Catherine Dixon for joining us.